They parked the blue car in the middle of the street as if it were an accusation, its hood gaped open, a small cloud of oil-scented steam curling into the morning air. People gathered out of habit more than curiosity, neighbors, a couple of kids on bicycles, and 3 young men who thought this would be a good show. At the center of it all stood Ayesha, grease under her nails, hair pulled back in a messy bun, eyes steady and unhurried. For her, machines were a language she had learned with her hands. Every engine hummed a secret. Every bearing and bolt had a story.
But the crowd didn't come to listen. They came to mock. "You sure you know what you're doing?" one of the young men called, half laughing. His voice had that casual cruelty people use when they want to make someone feel small without admitting fear or curiosity. "Unguarded." Ayesha wiped her palms on her trousers and said, calm as a clock, "I do. Tell me what's wrong." The man who owned the car, a man named Mr. Riker, stepped forward. He was the kind of man who wore confidence the way some men wear expensive cologne, a little too strong, a little too forced. "If you get it running, I'll pay you $100,000, he said, because he wanted to be the center of attention and because he wanted to make a point. He expected laughter, then a failure, then a good story he could tell at the bar for the rest of the year. The crowd chuckled. $100,000? For a woman with a wrench? Someone snorted. She'll take the money and run. So, Ayesha smiled the way someone smiles when they've heard that kind of thing all their life, like a small wind against a weathered wall. "I'm not here for your jokes," she said. "I'm here to fix the car." They circled her like sharks. Phones came out. Someone said, "This is going to be viral." They wanted the entertainment of watching her try and fail. Mockery is a crowd's first language. Respect has to be earned. Man. She opened the hood and leaned in. The engine was warm, as if it had been breathing poorly for a while. She listened. To anyone else, it was a jumble of metal and rhythm. To Ayesha, it was a throat clearing. She touched the spark plugs, sniffed the filters, ran her fingers along hoses and wires. One by one, the problems revealed themselves. Carbon buildup in the cylinders, a frayed electrical connector, a loose clamp that was letting pressure leak from the fuel system. Small things, until they worked together and made the engine sick. "Simple fixes," one of the young men said, but with the tone of someone daring the house of cards to tumble. Ayesha worked without showmanship. She replaced spark plugs with hands that had learned to move like a practiced pianist. She cleaned filters with an old toothbrush she kept in her pocket. She tightened the clamp that had been sleeping loose for months. Each small gesture was a sentence in a conversation with the machine. When she was done, she turned the key. The engine shuddered, coughed, and then went quiet. Someone laughed, louder this time. The phones tilted higher. "I told you," someone said. 2 minutes of effort, all for the camera." A sharp edge of disappointment nicked her, but she folded it under like she had folded other disappointments. She wasn't surprised. She was used to being underestimated. What surprised her less than words was the subtle sound that came from the engine's belly. A tiny, irregular rattle, the sort of whisper that tells you something deeper is wrong. It wasn't a part she could slap on and be done with. It was internal, a delicate valve seat that had worn thin, a part that needed careful fitting. "Looks like you missed one," another voice jeered. Ayesha wiped her hands and sat back on her heels. She thought about the valve. There were 2 choices. Call for a new part and wait for hours, possibly days, or try to remedy it with what she had, a temporary but precise fix that would restore function and test whether the problem was truly fail. She chose the latter. It was not because she wanted to prove anyone wrong, though proving them wrong would be a welcome side effect, but because she believed in solutions that could be made in the moment with skill rather than spectacle. She improvised. She took a thin shim of metal from her toolkit, massaged it into place with instruments that had been her companions for years, and gently reshaped the valley where the valve sat. It was delicate, like surgery, and it required patience no one in the crowd had time for. They wanted the reveal. They wanted to laugh. They wanted confirmation of their assumptions. 10 minutes passed like 10 heartbeats. People shifted, bored and impatient. One of the young men began to shout again. "If it doesn't start strong, we'll put it on his doorstep and let him deal with it." He laughed and went red with the thrill of cruelty. Ayesha closed the hood with a soft click and pulled the car key. She turned it slowly, as if she were waking the heart of an animal. The engine took, this time, with the deep inhale of someone who had been forgotten but not yet dead. The sound that came out was not a sputter, but a roar, the kind of full, round note that resonates down the spine. The people's laughter stopped like a record scratched in mid-play. Phones dropped. Faces changed. Surprise visited them like a small and awkward guest. Mr. Riker's pride, which had been a visible armor, went slack. He could not hide the flush of embarrassment that colored his cheeks. The young men who had mocked her stared at the ground or at the brilliant blue of the car's paint, unable to meet the woman they had denigrated. Ayesha stood back and listened to the engine. It sounded alive in a way that felt like an apology and a vindication both. She closed the hood and said simply, "It runs." Silence held them for a heartbeat, then another. Mr. Riker's mouth shifted. "I promised $100,000, he muttered, as if the words were a prank that had spun out of his control. You did it." "Feel." Ayesha met his eyes. "The greatest thing you can give me," she said, voice steady as late afternoon, "is respect. If you want to give money, then put it where it can help people who don't often get chances. Open a workshop, train the kids, teach women and people of color that they belong in this trade too. That would be worth more than money to me." There was a pause as the words landed, a small weight in the air. Mr. Riker shifted on his feet, then took a breath and, in a slight, awkward voice, said, I can do that. I'll help. I'll fund a workshop." It was not a grand repentance, not a fairy tale conversion. People do not change like pages turned, but it was a first step, an unglamorous, essential step. The story moved beyond the street. Someone uploaded the video, someone else shared it, comments poured in, some vicious, some praising, many ignorant, some thoughtful. The internet, as always, did what it wanted. But the real work happened in a small rented garage down on Elm Street, where Ayesha and Mr. Riker and a few of the men who had once laughed began to sweep up tools and lay down mats. They painted the workshop in bright colors and hung a chalkboard for lessons. It took time. People didn't instantly stop being mean because one person fixed a car. The young men, embarrassed but curious, came by at odd hours. Some asked to learn in low voices. Others tried to prove themselves. Ayesha taught them with patience not because she wanted to humiliate, but because she wanted them to see what they had missed all along, that a person's competence is not measured by their accent, their color, or their gender. She taught them how to listen to an engine as one listens to another person, with respect, attention, and humility. Little by little, the community changed. Boys who had once jeered now put on grease-smeared overalls and asked for guidance. Girls who had watched from porches came to the bench and picked up wrenches. People who had believed certain trades were only for some of them learned that their hands were capable. A shy teenager named Lila, who had watched the original video on repeat, came with her father and asked if she could learn. Her hands shook the first time she loosened a bolt, but Ayesha steadied them and let her try again. "Can I really do this?" Layla whispered on her first day, eyes wide. If you put your heart into learning, Ayesha answered, then yes, you can do this. Wrenches don't care who holds them. Engines don't care about names. They only care about listening and care. The workshop became not only a place to mend machines, but a place to mend confidence. People who had been pushed to the margins found steady work and a community that counted them. The $100,000 never changed hands in the way the crowd expected. It was not a single dramatic payoff. Instead, funds were pooled, refurbished tool sets were purchased, and small scholarships were set up. Ayesha never took the money for herself. She wanted the lesson to be clear. Skill must be shared, or it is only a private triumph. Years later, on a warm afternoon that smelled faintly of exhaust and fried snacks from a nearby stall, the street rang with the sound of a different kind of engine. A fleet of repaired cars and trucks, engines purring like contented animals. Kids ran around carrying old hubcaps like trophies. Mr. Riker, hair a bit thinner, stood by the workshop door and watched a little girl tighten a bolt with the same steady hands he had once mocked. He gave a small, private nod to Ayesha, then turned to help a young mechanic show a new student how to read a wiring diagram. The mockers didn't vanish. People are complicated, and old habits die like weeds, slowly, stubbornly, often needing constant tending. But the public cruelty lost its taste. Mockery turned into curiosity, then into respect, and sometimes into repentance. Those who refused to change were left on the sidelines, quieter now because the community around them had changed the tone. One moment stands out among many. A small child, not more than 7, came into the workshop one morning dragging a toy car. She looked at the tools with big, solemn eyes and asked, "When I grow up, can I be a mechanic like Ayesha?" Ayesha crouched down to the child's level and smiled. She took the toy car in her hands and, with exaggerated ceremony, tightened the imaginary bolts and made exaggerated engine sounds. "If you want it," she said, "you already are." That narrow, ordinary kindness widened into 100 others. A parent who had once been skeptical donated an old van for parts. A local school began offering summer classes at the workshop. Teens who once felt they had no options found steady apprenticeships and earned salaries that surprised their parents. Finally, the lesson of the story is not that one woman's single fix unmade 1,000 years of prejudice. It's simpler and truer. One person's steady competence creates a place where others can learn to be competent too. When a woman who has been underestimated simply does her work, the world is forced to pay attention. It doesn't always apologize neatly, but it does, sometimes, rearrange what it thought it knew. People remember the moment the engine roared. They remember the sound because it signaled more than a machine's recovery. It was the sound of a door being opened, a door into a workshop, into a possibility, into a story that included more people than it had before. It was the sound that said plainly that talent can be quiet and then suddenly loud. Ayesha kept working. She taught, she mended, she argued when people treated others poorly, and she listened when people came to her ashamed and wanting to change. She did not seek glory. She sought repair, of engines, of confidence, of the small everyday injustices that accumulate like grit and make people doubt themselves. Her work was a steady drumbeat that, over time, became the neighborhood's heartbeat. And whenever a stranger pulled into the street with a stubborn engine and asked for help, the answer came quickly now. The look they got from those who walked by was full of a practiced warmth. No one rushed to laugh. People reached for wrenches. They listened to the machine, and they listened to the person beneath their hood. Because after all, the engine and the human had more in common than anyone had supposed. Both wanted to be heard. Now, in the end, the $100,000 became less important than the first terrifying roar of that engine and the long, patient work that followed. It was a story about skill, sure, But more than that, it was a story about what happens when someone refuses to be invisible. It was about the sound of a world learning to be kinder, not because it had to, but because it heard something worth listening to. So if you ever find yourself at the edge of a crowd, wondering whether to join in the laughter or to listen, remember the blue car and the woman who fixed it. Remember that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simple. Do your work well and invite others to learn. The noise will stop, the engine will roar, and then something important will begin.